Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So students, this is the first lecture of our class. My name is Qasim Shafiq and the topic of today's discussion is postmodern fiction. In today's class, we are going to discuss. It takes some time, I think. What is postmodernism? Genesis of postmodernism, modernism, and then postmodern fiction. Students, postmodernism is a hot topic in a wide variety of disciplines or areas of study, including art, architecture, music, film, literature, and technology. Although a conceptual term is expected to have a clear-cut definition that defines its connotation and extension, it is hardly so in the area of social sciences and humanities. The reasons are as follows. First of all, concepts in social sciences and humanities are relative because unlike an objective signified in physical science that has an objective signified, the signified of a concept in social sciences and humanities is usually an idea that is hardly definable. Secondly, since there are differences in their comprehension of the same concept, people constantly revise or redefine the concept only to enlarge its connotation rather than making it clearer and more exact. Students, of all the definitions available, some scholars believe that postmodernism refers to a movement. For example, as Sarup understands, it is a movement in advanced capitalist culture, particularly in the arts, while some others, like Murphy, take it as certain radically experimental works of literature and art. No matter what else it may be, this lecture adopts that postmodernism is a cultural phenomenon embodied in areas such as art, literature, and so on, which is becoming increasingly dominant in contemporary society. As to the exact time when postmodernism arose, a unanimous agreement has not yet been reached among theorists, since each of them sticks to his own viewpoint. These viewpoints can be generally sorted out into three catalogues, namely Genesis of postmodernism before World War II, Genesis of postmodernism after World War II, and Genesis of postmodernism before and after World War II. Theorists who hold that postmodernism originated before the Second World War are best represented by British postmodernist Charles Jens and American postmodernist Ayub Hassan. Hassan indicates in his The Postmodern Turn, published 1987, that postmodernism might be tracked back to the Spanish postmodernismo in Federico de Onís and he believes that it is James Joyce that marks the beginning of postmodernism. Cheng's view is slightly different from that of Hassan's because, according to his research, he holds that it was British artist John Chapman who first put the term postmodernism to use in the 1870s, and that the appearance of term post-industrial in the sociology circle during the period from 1914 to 1922 marked the beginning of post-ease research. Theorists who believe that postmodernism came out after World War II have not reached a universal agreement either. American New Marxist scholar Frederick Jameson believes that postmodernism arose in the 1950s as the offspring of transitional capitalism, late capitalism, and consumer society. American sociologist Daniel Bell holds that postmodernism prevailed in the 1960s as the result of modernism being pushed to an extreme by capitalist cultural conflicts. Still, another chief postmodernist is French philosopher Jean-Francois Lyotard, whose attitude towards the origin of postmodernism is that it emerged in the 1960s as the result of information age as well as the deflection to the crisis of legalizing capitalism. So it easily comes to a conclusion that theorists who support that postmodernism firstly appeared after World War II generally associate the genesis of postmodernism with the development of capitalism and conflicts in society after the Second World War, focusing on the research of the relationship among them. Among those who advocate the genesis of postmodernism in both before and after World War II, Dutch scholar Hans Burton is of chief importance. He expounded the evolvement of postmodernism and defined it as the following four stages. The first period ranged from 1934 to 1964, during which postmodernism started to appear in literary works of many well-known writers such as Honest, Dudley Fitz, etc. In the second phase of the middle 1960s, postmodernism interacted with the American anti-culture movement, and postmodernists made up their mind to break thoroughly with modern writers. During the third stage, from 1972 to 1967 to 1976, postmodernism developed into an international movement in which the European existentialism had exerted its huge effect, and its last stage of development from the late 1970s to the 1980s, postmodernism was much more compatible because it adopted the various cultural phenomena that had not been accepted by modernism. To clarify the point, students, we are going to discuss what is modernism. Modernism, as defined in the Bedford Glossary of Critical and Literary Terms, is a revolutionary movement including all of the creative arts that rooted in the 1890s and a transitional period during which artists and writers sought to liberate themselves from the constraints and polite conventions associated with Victorianism. Modernist endeavors to break away from tradition and convention through experimentation with new forms, devices, and styles, and modern works reflect the pervasive sense of loss, disillusionment, and even despair in the wake of the First World War, with the affix post. Postmodernism suggests a time after modernism, or the future of modernism. So postmodernism follows modernism as both a succession and an anti of it. On the one hand, modernism creates the conditions from which postmodernism grows, and postmodernism, partly as a continuation of some modern ideas, such as challenging cultural forms and pushing back the limits of how people represent the world. Students, take literature as an example. Postmodern literature preserves some writing techniques, the spirit, and even some of the themes of modern literature, such as the alienation of humanity, historical discontinuity, and so on. In this aspect, modernism and postmodernism intertwined with each other, and there is no strict boundary that distinguishes them. On the other hand, however, postmodernism resists the modernist doctrine of the supremacy of reason, the notion of truth, and the belief in the perfectibility of man. Although scholars disagree among themselves as to what explicitly postmodernism involves, they have reached a consensus on one point. This phenomenon marks the end of a single universal worldview. Postmodernism abandons the quest for a unified grasp of objective reality, and it asserts that the world has no center. Only differing viewpoints and perspectives. The postmodern ethos resists unified and universally valid explanations advocated by modernism. So students, it replaces them with respect for different and a celebration of a local and particular at the expense of the universal. Postmodernism also entails a rejection of the emphasis on rational discovery through the scientific method which has provided the intellectual foundation for the modern attempt to construct a better world. As its foundation, then, the postmodern outlook is anti-modern. Students, although postmodern fiction might be traced back as early as to the 17th century or even earlier, most Western critics believe that it became an influential literary trend in around the 1950s and the 1960s in Britain and the US, and after reached its peak in the 1970s and the 1980s, it faded in the 1990s. Postmodern fiction was born and developed under certain historical and cultural background. A comparatively general understanding is that it is the direct result of the Western turbulent social life after the Second World War. People were so shocked by the fascists' appalling ferocity during World War II that they started to doubt social moral standards, the social moral standards and values they had been holding all along became more after the war, as the intrinsic problems in capitalistic society became more conflicting. People were more and more confused with the increase of social upheavals, and they lost faith and loyalty and became indifferent to others. Such disorder of society cannot be separated from the rapid development of science and technology, which turns the society into an accurate machine on which each person serves as a trivial part. Mass media and convenient transportation broaden the public knowledge, and people start to realize that the existence of knowledge and objects depend on themselves and the relation between rather than certain eternal nature. Meanwhile, the development of high technology brings about mechanical and digital copies in large scale. Hence, reality and original texts disappear, and everything can be fake and imitation. Modern societies are constructed on the basis that signifiers always point to signifiers in which reality resides, while in postmodernism, however, there are only signifiers. The idea of any stable or permanent reality disappears, and gone with it the idea of signifiers that signifiers point to. In literary field, the with it the idea of any stable or permanent reality disappears, and gone with it the idea of signifiers that signifiers point out that signifiers point to. In literary fields, in literary field, the fiction of the creating subject gives way to the frank confiscation, quotation, accumulation, and repetition of already existing images. Works such as these, which bring together heterogeneous images and technologies, not only undermine many modernist assumptions, but also raise questions about originality and authenticity. Intertextuality and hypertexts take the place of manuscript and originality. Compared with modern fiction, postmodern fiction challenges and disintegrates the form of fiction itself rather than innovate it. Modern fiction emphasizes skills, structure, and language, while postmodern works blur literary genres and break conventional narration. In contrast to the absurd meaning in modern fiction, postmodern fiction is meaningless with language gains. Unlike the modern writings, skills such as interior monologue and stream of consciousness, postmodern skills include irony, pastiche, and collage. Okay, students, see you in next class.